one of the things that we're going to have to look at is resources. Sustainable resources is another one of the attributes. But of course, as you formalize something and it gets a line item in somebody's budget, then that helps to sort of undergird the regime, right? Also, what you see with networks as they continue to operate, we sort of talked about that yesterday. Networks that are very active, so you might have networks of government bureaucrats or networks of bureaucrats and scientists and NGOs, right, like the Great Lakes panel on aquatic nuisance species, for example, is not only government folks but also think tank folks, science folks, people who are studying the issue. And the network spawns committees and subcommittees, and then there are rules for how these are supposed to operate, and then they get successful, and then somebody starts devoting more resources to them, and then a number of government actors might give them resources, right? And then they become more formalized, and I think that also contributes to the resilience. At the same time, though, I just want to emphasize this role that more informal relations among people have in terms of moving formal institutions forward, right? Formal institutions can get mired in their rules and can become stagnant. But I think it's the networks, it's the people talking around the lakes that really keep things moving forward and refresh our agenda and remind us that, that there's lots of things that we haven't done. And it's not that the formal framework doesn't do that, but I think networks are a really good way of sort of making sure that we're still talking about things.
Thank you. And I wonder if maybe part of that is also the fact that they started as informal networks, and so you established relationships, and so then there's more investment there as well. And I guess the follow-up there would also be, do you see a similar coordination between where things start in terms of informal networks and process legitimacy in terms of acceptance, not only among government officials, but also among your local, your landowners, your industry, your, whatnot?
Yeah, so what you're asking about is the degree to which sort of the processes actually help to undergird stability? Is that what you're... Yeah, certainly. I think the main message is that we can't, and I think we've done a pretty good job of this in the basin. When you look across all of the things that are going on and the degree to which there are contributions of people's time into so much of what goes on, we just can't ever lose sight of the fact that that's what drives it. It's not a treaty. It's not an agreement. These are very, very important aspects of the basin framework, but the people that actually meet and discuss and and are concerned about things, those are really important. And we have to keep supporting that type of interaction, even though that, as I said, often comes from soft budgets and is not our priority oftentimes. But I wonder if any of my colleagues might want to respond to that as well. Nope? Okay.
We'll do ladies first.
Hi, I'm Dana Dolan. I'm working with George Mason University and doing my dissertation research on the Murray-Darling Basin and the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm looking at the governance aspects there. One of the questions that's come up for me in the Chesapeake Bay in particular is, and this keys off of, I'm sorry, I missed the woman's name in the middle. When you were talking about resiliency and the science networks that are in place, there's a similar situation in the Chesapeake Bay, the Science and Technical Advisory Committee for the Chesapeake Bay Program. And maybe about 2 years ago, they had a panel to try to bring in social science expertise. And so my question is, are you seeing this coming in, and maybe some of the other regions as well? And in Chesapeake Bay, I'll say 2 years ago, the panel was there. They're still discussing how to bring that knowledge in, because generally the people that are on the formal networks are just not familiar enough to understand how to incorporate that new type of knowledge new to them.
Well, guess it's sort of a general question for, this is partly what we're doing here. But in terms of sort of formal institutions in the Great Lakes Basin, if you look at the, you know, a lot of participation comes not just from sort of natural scientists, but also from social scientists in a lot of the networks. It's not exclusively one or the other, but there's a lot of integration there. Although, you know, it's obviously dominated by natural scientists. But in the like the IJC institutions, the Science Advisory Board for a long time would have, it's primarily natural scientists, but they would often include social scientists on the Science Advisory Board. So you had a planner, economist, you know, that kind of thing was, you know, there was sort of, well, it was partly the people who were trying to push that issue within the regional office of the IJC. So that was really up and down, but it has happened through the formal institutions to include people on those boards. And that right now there's just a restructuring of those boards. So like the new Water Quality Board looks quite different than I think it did in the past. So I think there are people who are concerned about that issue and sort of have a sense that there needs to be more, a broader spectrum of voices at the, you know, the scholarly level included.
You are seeing a transition to bringing in more.
Well, I think it's up and down, but I mean, I think that there are, yeah, and I think that's exactly what this group is trying to do, is to take, because, you know, there are a lot of networks around, you know, the hard sciences, and one of the motivations, and probably one of the reasons that we got SSHRC funding, was because we were bringing the social science perspective forward, where in the past it was kind of neglected, or more neglected than the kind of
Hey, folks, great job. And I guess the question is more to Dustin, but maybe a little bit to Tim. When you do comparative governance issues out west, it often starts with quantity issues, right? Before quality, although they're of course intermingled. And traditionally on the lakes, I guess we can argue it's though they're also intermingled, that it often starts with quality issues and then moves to quantity, or to talk about. From your framing, or from your analysis, what would you say in terms of your Western experiences, both in the U.S., Canada, and Australia, might be most valuable, I guess, to think about in terms of the Great Lakes and governance issues here that might be translatable from that perspective? And this might be for you, Tim, too, given the stuff that you did.
You want to go first? Or? You go first. Okay. The one thing I would say, and you can, well, I'll make 2 points. The first point is that I think actually in the Great Lakes, water quantity came before water quality, given that the Boundary Waters Treaty dealt mostly with quantity, and it dates to 1909, and the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement dates to 1972. If you look within the Boundary Waters Treaty itself, there's an interesting comparison between the approach to governing waters and water quantity in the Great Lakes versus that in the St. Mary and Milk rivers shared between Montana and Alberta. And in the articles dealing with the St. Mary's and Milk rivers, they actually lay out an apportionment of the river, saying that Canada gets so much water, the US gets so much water, and they did that because of the water scarcity, and the governments and the irrigators specifically wanted some certainty as to how much water they were going to get before they invested, you know, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars into their irrigation systems. You don't see that basic attribute in the Great Lakes. There is no such thing as apportionment. I'm not suggesting there should be, but you know, is there? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's true. It may be something that we have to look at in the Great Lakes if and when irrigation continues to grow with climate change and the rivers become over-allocated. But and if you look at you know, the Western U.S., the Colorado, you look at the Murray-Darling, they have apportionment agreements itself They all have apportionment agreements. It seems to be one of the first things they do to create some certainty.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with the sequencing in terms of quantity tending to come before quality. And with being new to the Great Lakes, I wouldn't comment too much on the direct implications there, other than to say that the general point, ideally, when we're looking at developing new policies and governance regimes, we need to get past the separation between quality and quantity. And I know that is an obvious point, but it's important in the sense that of how we frame our research in terms of integrated governance. And the reason to mention that is because in the situations where they have put in place apportionment agreements between states among different water users, they have either neglected or underestimated the water quality issues, and they become much more costly to deal with once you have clearly established property rights. So that's a consideration, is to take a more integrated approach moving forward. And with the Great Lakes being in the position, I would assume that this is an ideal way to develop an approach here. The other thing I did want to add a comment to the previous question on the science policy interface and how social science factors in based on the experiences in the Murray-Darling Basin. So I lived there for a year in the 2010-11 period when they were developing this comprehensive basin plan, led to the burning of the plan and that demonstration that I showed you in the talk. And the role of science was very interesting because you had the traditional role of science, which was trying to understand the ecology, the hydrology, defining sustainable limits for the basin. And there was uncertainty and conflict over that. But there also the issue of political economy and the role that science can play in informing trade-offs where there are winners and losers. So in this sense here, they're trying to develop a comprehensive basin plan dealing with water quality, dealing with water quantity in an integrated approach. A good example of the suggestion that I made previously. In doing so, the proposal was going to be to reduce water diversions for existing users, so people were going to lose. And the situation is one where the costs were immediate, concentrated, and localized, but the benefits of the basin plan were diffused, distributed, delayed. And so where does the social science come in? How do you make decisions where there are going to be winners and losers in this way? Now, the immediate reaction was to draw on economics. If we can just quantify the costs and benefits, then we can make a decision. And when I went there, I had done some research and publishing in economics. They just immediately assumed I was an economist. So I'd be entering in these conversations. But there were limits to what that could do because the cost could be quantified quite clearly, but the benefits less so, particularly for ecological purposes. And so toward the end of the basin planning process, there was an appreciation for policy research, for governance research, for understanding community engagement processes. And so there is tremendous capacity in the Murray-Darling. It wasn't coordinated in time to inform those kinds of decisions. And I think the ideal is to have networks like this in place, which are engaging with policymakers, engaging with stakeholders. So when these kinds of crises or processes are underway, they can feed into the decision-making process.
I'd also just add one thing. I've looked at the Murray-Darling as well, and the one thing I noticed there when it came to science is that the environmentalists were very good at using science to promote the idea of increasing environmental flows, and they employed a lot of scientists, and they were very good at publicizing that science. And the irrigators caught on to this because they were getting trounced in the kind of the science wars. What the irrigators started to do later on was employ economists. And the economists would look at, okay, if you take away the irrigator's water, this is what it's going to do to the local economies, to the local local agriculture, local cultures, local communities. And they got very good at publicizing those. And so they kind of evened up the fight in the science wars, so to speak.
Hi, my name is Michael Kirsten with 21st Century Science. I missed some of the earlier presentations. I was at a meeting, but I wanted to, and this question may be addressed to the earlier panel, but I wanted to ask a question about the International Joint Commission and the Great Lakes water stability and see what the current status is of the IJC and the discussion on the Great Lakes levels. I'm working with Pierre Gingat from Hydro-Quebec, and he has a proposal to add control dams. He says there's control dams on partially on Lake Erie, but not on Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. But if you had control dams added, that we could capture the spring floods and also on the St. Lawrence River, that there would be enough water just by the spring floods if we added 3 or 4 dams on the Great Lakes that currently don't have control dams to stabilize the level of the Great Lakes. I was just wondering is there any current discussion with the International Joint Commission on a plan to capture more water from the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway? He did present this to Ms. Pollock of the IJC last year, but he hadn't received a response yet. So
This is going to be a long conversation that goes on for quite a little while. No, not right now, here. There's been a lot of conversation within the commission and within I'll say the regime to encourage the governments to either enhance the value of the reference to the IJC on the lakes level study, or to charge the Army Corps of Engineers with the responsibility of looking at structured engineering options, multi-lake regulations for different options to stabilize or to prevent further degradation, particularly in the in Georgian Bay. So what they're looking at now is a recommendation to the governments for a comprehensive study on many different structural options, but also on other control structures. There's been no response yet, no confirmed response yet that work will go on, but there's been a lot of political pressure to have it done. So just to put in a new structure for a particular lake is not really on the way that this is proceeding. It's really proceeding at, if we look at the control structures that we have on the different lakes right now, are there additional ones that we need to put in place, and how would you co-manage those collaboratively rather than just the control rules for each one of those structures individually? So it's an ongoing process, and I don't know that reference has been approved yet, or whether the Army Corps has agreed to do it, but there's a lot of movement in that direction. Many of the state senators are behind it. Council of Great Lakes Governors are behind it. So there's a lot of voices out there really pushing for this to happen. So I hope that helps.
Okay, well, we have a closing presentation by Gail, who maybe you can introduce yourself, Gail and Savitri. We're going to really talk about how we as a project are trying to kind of move beyond our core team of Canada and U.S. scholars and really, in the next phase, engage more broadly with folks like yourselves and others with interest in terms of the social science particularly, and the governance questions that we're grappling with, both on the public engagement and public opinion side, but also on the kind of institutional and implementation side. So I'll turn it over to Gail, so we can hand it Gail's going to update you on what we've been trying to do in kind of enhancing our outreach and engagement with folks like you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to do this presentation, but this work was done, a lot of the data in this work was done, compiled by Savitri, and she's right over there, and she'll be fielding some of your questions if you have any questions. So I'm going to try and go through this quite quickly, just to give you a sense. This is not a research finding, a research area. I should have introduced myself. I'm Gail Kranzberg. I'm a professor and director of the Center for Engineering and Public Policy at McMaster University in the beautiful Hamilton city of waterfalls. So I'm going to talk about why we need this outreach, a little bit about the regional complexity, which you've heard about, but I have a couple of charts just to wow you a little bit. Some of the data gathering that we put together, the engagement opportunities, and some future initiatives as this project goes forward. So the need is really that in 2004-05, Bales and a number of other Great Lakes scientists said that the Great Lakes are in a historically complicated, are in a more complicated place today than they have been historically. So we heard about eutrophication in the 70s. It was ban phosphorus, fix sewage treatment plants, get engineers to take care of it, fine. We had PCBs harming our waterfowl and our raptors, and so we'll ban it. So engineers, solution, fine. And we just heard panels here talking about diffuse issues, non-point source pollution, invasive species, changing climate, a number of things that traditional approaches of top-down command and control isn't going to work, and that they contend that the Great Lakes may be approaching a tipping point. So this is a question then, if this is the case, how do we fix this governance, myriad of governance structures? So this chart just shows you, obviously, 2 countries, 2 provinces, 8 states, 29 tribes, 64 First Nations, without including Métis, 650 government bodies, 50 different agencies that have different jurisdictions on the Great Lakes. So the point of the outreach is to see how many of these entities we can get to start to understand their collective roles or work with us on research or policy research areas that they're grappling with, given this complexity. Given this number of organizations, these are just some of the more popular organizations that we all know about. The IJC that we've heard about and their advisory boards. I'm not going to read all of these, but you see a number of very well-established institutions that have been around for a long time. And some of us have done a gap analysis. Are they working at competing purposes? Are there areas where there is no one institution doing the right thing for the right issue, or are they working on similar issues and overlapping without coordination and collaboration? So these are this is the regional complexity of the area. Any of you who've worked here will recognize all of these and understand the good work that they do, but they work in some cases in silos, or in other cases not in the kind of cooperation and collaboration that we've been talking about in the NIAT framework. So inclusion and engagement means better understanding and cooperation, and that means cooperation for implementation. So that's why we want this public outreach of the work that we're doing, so there'd be more engagement for people who, when we heard the POET analysis, people just don't know what's wrong with the Great Lakes. So that's just, in my mind, that's just wrong. We ought to be fixing that. So how do we encourage shared responsibility? That's by getting the information out. That's by collaborating, getting the information into people's hands. And the policy research then that we're doing, we hope will be integrated with science as well as economics and other kinds of programs that are in the region. The water quality agreement that we've heard Marcia and others talk about here, and it's been a very big part of what I do in my life, is it's an agreement about an environmental problem. And it lacks the social science perspective. It lacks the economics of the region. It lacks the political opportunities. And without that, and it's very science-based, and that's great because I'm a scientist by training, but without this policy research networking capacity, it's going to miss things, much like your question earlier. So what are we trying to do to improve governance and policy outcomes in the Great Lakes region? The outreach piece was a compilation of database in terms of policy researchers or policy stakeholders. So Savitri spent a lot of time scanning universities, agencies, many of those institutions that I had on that screen, looking at policymakers in government or policy analysts in government, policy advocates for the nonprofit sector, policy engagement from industry, like the Council of Great Lakes Industries and others, academic policy scholars. We just compiled a database populated with these types of people, applied academic policy researchers, which I sort of am, academic policy scholars, as I said. At least 90 institutions are in our database, many individuals from many of those institutions. So the database is in the order of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, individuals from many different institutions. This is just one image of the complexity of the data of the region. This was done before the 2012 protocol. The blue is obviously US, red is Canada. So some of these are binational, some exist on the US side, some exist on the Canadian side. We have institutions on the Canadian side that you don't have in the States, like conservation authorities. There are things in the US that are sort of binational, but not really. The Council of Great Lakes Governors has input from the province of Ontario and Quebec, but not membership. So this institutional complexity means how do we get these folks to start having access to some of the work that we're doing? How do we reach out to them to say, what kind of research can we do with this complex system to improve governance outcomes and policy outcomes. So the kinds of things that we have available right now on our website are Great Lakes Policy References, which is a documentary about a bibliography of both academic and academic Great Lakes policies that we're going to be updating very soon. This is on Carolyn's Glimprin website. Policy brief series, many of our students have done policy briefs, so those are available to anybody who joins, anybody who comes to the website and has access to all the information that we have compiled there. The presentations that we've had to either practitioners or other academic audiences, things that we've done on in the past, those are widely available. It's all free. The inventory of Great Lakes laws and policies, a lot of the law inventories came from Catherine here. We have the opinion research that will be that the poet is going to be making available. That will be on the website for the network members. The reference list to Great Lakes scholarly policy publications, policy researchers. So all of this is available. We have a number of. We will probably have fairly soon a dedicated journal publication that has many of our papers on it. Those will all be available. So it's really a place, it's a go-to place, unlike, or much like the International Association for Great Lakes Research is a place where many Great Lakes scientists can go search for the experts on certain topics. If you go to their website, you'll see it, and you find there's like one place where governance shows up, and I think there's 5 of us named there, but the rest of it is on fisheries and zooplankton and phytoplankton and benthos and all that kind of stuff. Well, this is sort of like a similar, we're hoping this will be a similar directory where people will network with each other and collaborate with us on some of these, what we think are rather important research areas. Some of the outreach events that we've been involved in, outreach to obviously one of the top priorities with the International Joint Commission. We've been involved with their indicators, workshops, ecosystem indicators that they're developing, human health indicators, performance indicators in terms of government's performance in addressing the state of the Great Lakes. They have semi-annual meetings. They will have triennial meetings now under the new Water Quality Agreement, and we make sure that some of us are present at all of those so that the social science element of what they're talking about is there. And in fact, we had a very exciting response from them just a few weeks ago when they were doing the performance indicators, where I think Carolyn and Deborah, myself were present, but made the case, particularly Carolyn and Deborah, that the whole issue of governance, and they went, what is that anyway? What is governance? And so it stimulated a lot of interest to have a renewed conversation about what this network does, what the NIAT people do anyway, probably POET too, as an interface with the IJC and therefore with their products and their recommendations to government. The Great Lakes Commission is another venue. They have semi-annual meetings and observers, and we have requested in many cases to have observer status. We've invited them to join the network, and we'll continue to try and be present at their semi-annual meetings because they have broad membership from all the Great Lakes states and observers from Quebec and Ontario there. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative has annual meetings that we plan to attend, again, to converse with the mayors. The on-the-ground delivery mechanism for making things change on the Great Lakes. I mean, we talked about, federal connection to local. Well, local is where it happens. If you want something to happen, you probably are not going to write to your MP. You're probably going to write to your mayor and say, why is this slick in this river? What are you doing about it? So we feel the dialogue with the executive director, with the executive of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative is really important, and we've been working with them to look for opportunities for joint research. The International Association for Great Lakes Research is finally broadening out their scope. They started off as a fisheries research institution. They became a Great Lakes Science Institution with a bit of social sciences, and we started to discuss GLIPRIN with them, this policy research network, as it was being developed, and then we will be reporting back to IAGLR in Hamilton at the lovely McMaster University in May this spring. And try and get some of our work published in what was traditionally a science-based journal, but we are now getting some inroads into putting social science publications into the go-to journal for where people go to understand what are the pressures on the Great Lakes and what can we do about it. And finally, not just from a technological point of view or scientific point of view, but also from a governance, perhaps, and a social sciences point of view. The Great Lakes Executive Committee is the binational organization under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that has recently been renamed. It was called the Binational Executive Committee. We've been involved with them. They are particularly interested in what we have to offer from a social science research perspective so they can implement the new Water Quality Agreement, which talks about a nearshore framework, which they have no idea what is going to look like, but Marshall will help them understand it. So we have observer status there. We regularly provide them updates. Carolyn got a binational reception to engage, to talk about what this group is, and to solicit input from them in terms of how we may be able to help, what research priorities they may have that this kind of network might be able to offer. There are a number of other networks that we link to. There's the Water Economics Policy and Governance Network. It's a mouthful. WPEGNI, run by Steve Renzetti out at Brock. Many of us are interacting with that network because you see the word policy and governance there, so we have some interactions there. There's the Great Lakes Futures Project, which Kate and I have been involved with, which is looking at how to predict what the future would be. At Savitry was one of our research assistants on that. What would the future of the Great Lakes look like in our ideal future, and what are the policy requirements, therefore policy shifts or reforms? And our network very much links with the outcomes, and many of us have been engaged in both of those networks. So this networking and linkages applies to not just governance of the Great Lakes, but I think governance of the policy researchers in the region, if you will. Just occurred to me. So we're going to look for input on future policy research priorities. So we had a questionnaire on the web that we put out, which asked 4 major questions. So what are some of the research topics that you see are the most important over the next 1 to 5 years? Which would be the most highest on your priority list? Would you be interested in collaborating with us? And if yes, on what? And these are just a number of things. Supervising students, giving us money, that wasn't a big one. But you know, being an advisor on research priorities. And we had this out there, and this is just one of the degrees of expression of interest, which you can't read. So I'll just say one of the top ways that people who answered that survey wanted to work with us, and these are people from government and outside of government, was to provide research ideas and an advisory capacity dissemination of findings. And I thought that was very encouraging. A few others that are very nice, you know, financial support for stewards or facilitating research. But those are so this is my version of my survey right now. No, wasn't. It wasn't a very, so it was a small sample size, so we can't really say whether these are statistically significant or not between Canada and the US, but we can say that there is a great expression of interest just in that one very quick survey to share research ideas and be an advisor. Some of the things people want to do, look at adaptive co-management as a way of looking for resource management, including social and economic considerations into nearshore protection and remediation. I thought that was really interesting. Economic value of ecosystem services might be an area of interest. Demographic changes and therefore projections of the health and integrity of the region. How to include concepts of sustainability in the governance framework for restoration, stormwater in response to extreme weather, finding synergies between Western ways of knowing and traditional ecological knowledge, some of the things that we haven't done at all yet, but these are all ideas about things that we could be doing in the future. So with that, what we will be doing in terms of outreach in the future, your input goes here. This is just what we've done so far, so we look forward to share your ideas. I really want to thank Savitry for doing that compilation of that database that we reached out to so many people to join, to log on to the website and join us. And I want to thank all of you for coming and for helping to make the lakes great. And I'll now turn it back over to you, Carolyn.
Well, great. I think that concludes our trying to do as a group of Canadian and American social scientists. We are excited about what we've produced thus far, and we really look forward to kind of moving this forward. We have applied to the same granting council that's funded us so far, and we hope to continue this work and be able to collaborate across borders as policy researchers. So thank you again, and I'd like to really thank the Wilson Center. They not only hosted us today to have to present some of these results to you folks, but they were also very gracious and provided us with space yesterday for our team to meet and hammer out our next steps. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you.